Europa je u krizi. U godini pred nama u toj će se nezapamćenoj krizi lomiti politička koplja uoči europskih izbora 2024. godine. Živimo u vremenu u kojem se kunemo u budućnost, ali od nje i strepimo. Kakva je? Što je i tko naša budućnost, naša mladost, naši mladi? Oni kojima je ta budućnost sadašnjost koju nose na svojim leđima. Oni koji će u oči gledati tu stalno nesigurnu budućnost, dok traumatična sadašnjost, pandemije, digitalnog kaosa, dezinformacija i straha prijeti demokraciji i onome što se Europom i dalje zove.
You deal with yourself now, and you hold me accountable now. And my colleagues and your representatives, who you vote for, you hold them accountable today. What do you want the European Parliament to do? What do you want Europe to do? What does Europe mean for you? For a lot of young people, it's about opportunity. So use this opportunity today so that you can spread and share the belief in the promise of Europe. To do this, I ask you to fight for the promise of Europe and to bring the promise of Europe wherever you go.
Što je to Europa, a što demokracija za generaciju Z? Onu kojoj pripadaju mladi koji bi 2024. prvi put trebali izaći na izbore. Tko su oni u koje se kunemo, a kojih nema u nacionalnim parlamentima? Zanima li ih politika kakvom smo je mi znali i zvali? Što je za njih demokracija? Tko su glasači 2024. Naš put u serijalu Glasači 2024 počinjemo onako kako su nas učili u školi. Traženjem definicija od starijih autoriteta. Što je to uopće i kakva je demokracija u kojoj živimo? Jedan od onih koji na svijetu najviše zna upravo o demokraciji, australski je politolog John Keane. Srećem ga u Beču.
Time we're living in, you started a blog called Enemies of Democracy, if I am right. So what is the democracy as we knew it? As you called monetary democracy, so post-Second World War democracy, where we accept the voting cycle, establish some monetary institutions to be kind of watchdogs of those governments. What are we experiencing at this moment? What are these threats and who are these enemies of the democracy as we know it in the West?
Well, this is a period in which there is writing on democracy's wall. In my lifetime, I've never seen anything like it. Many are speaking of a Zeitenwende, a turning point in history. Some observers liken it to the 1920s and 30s. The disaffection with democracy, the sense that it doesn't work, that parties are unrepresentative, that governments are deciding things without the consent of people. All of these feelings are growing, and this represents, in my view, a very serious threat to monetary democracy. What does this strange phrase mean? It means a type of democracy born in the 1940s in which democracy is nothing less than free and fair elections, but something much more. And the something much more is the reliance on watchdog, barking dog institutions to expose corruption, to bring accountability to corporations, to governments, to non-governmental organizations that are corrupted or abusing power. This kind of democracy is threatened by a whole variety of trends. Growing gap between rich and poor, the unpopularity of and declining membership of parties, ecological catastrophes, extreme weather events, death of species. And these trends are, we don't know where they're going to end, but young people are caught up in these contradictory trends.
Kriza povjerenja nešto je što obilježava naše doba. Kome se danas vjeruje? Kome mladi vjeruju? Iz Beča dolazim u Brisel, gdje mi Tim Weber, jedan od direktora u Edelman, globalnoj agenciji koja se bavi upravo ispitivanjem povjerenja, kaže kako se u krizi demokracije stavovi mladih sve više mijenjaju.
If you look, for example, what just happened now in the United States, where it was the young who rejected the far right, who rejected the Republican Party, the anti-abortionists. So there has been a change. In Europe at the moment, it plays out a little bit differently. If you look at it amongst Gen Z, the data that I have seen, and of course a bit difficult to see whether they're really true, but the data that I have seen tell us that amongst Gen Z in most European countries, far-right parties were the party they voted most for, whether that is in Italy or in Poland, Sweden, or in Austria, Sweden, France. Gen Z may be interested in sustainability, but they do vote for far-right parties. At least that's the strongest party amongst them. Not the majority, but the strongest party. And that is deeply concerning. The question is, will there be a wake-up moment like there was in the United States or not? And if we extend that a little bit, millennials believe now, a very large chunk of them, nearly half, that actually democracy is failing them. And therefore they look for alternative forms like a strongman. And there's something very fundamental happening, and that's now something from the trust barometer again. We see a huge gap, a trust gap, between people who are well educated and earn a lot and the majority of the population. And this trust gap is very simple to explain. People who are well educated and earn a lot, the system works for them. It's fantastic. But the majority of people, look, they're losing their jobs, they feel insecure, they feel threatened by the economy, by technology, by foreigners, by the environment, you name it. And therefore the trust, of course, collapses. And the people who have not had success yet are, of course, the young, because they're just starting out. And that's what's so worrying. So if they don't believe that the system works for them, that democracy works for them, that globalization works for them, at that point, they of course look for solutions. And there are a lot of populists out there who claim to have the simple solutions. And the question is, can they look through that? Who do people trust? They don't trust media anymore. They don't trust even NGOs anymore. They don't trust government anymore. They do trust business, but not the younger generations. But who they trust are people like themselves, their peers, their friends. And so if someone recommends something to you on TikTok, if someone says, have this person, check this person out, and then very quickly they go into the recommendation rabbit hole, the algorithm of TikTok, or for that matter of YouTube and other places. And this is where they get the information. I mean, my son is 23-year-old, and he recently talked about inflation. He said, oh, you have to check out this YouTube video. And there was an influencer who gave this kind of live 1-hour stream of consciousness about what inflation is. Now, I used to be a business editor. I don't think he got it quite right, but for my son and for many of his generation, that is the truth. And this is how they talk and think about these things.
So what are the basically trends or this feeling of young people of today. You've mentioned disappointment, you've mentioned also, in a sense, insecure or precarious work they're faced with. We know that we live in a digital environment that basically is uncontrollable, but by usual means in democracy. In a sense, we know what happens with big tech, with influencing, with disinformation. So where do we leave or put the youth of today in these definitions of democracy as we knew them?
Everything depends, I'll say it again, much depends on what we mean by politics. If politics is about elections, parties, parliaments, politicians, governments, then the survey evidence that's accumulating is that in many actually existing monitory democracies, young people are disaffected. They don't join parties, they have limited respect for politicians, they curse governments, and they hate politics. If politics is about engagement in public life, trying to effect power reversals through public action, through public assembly, helped by online engagement, then there's plenty of young people's involvement. But there's another sense, a third sense of politics. It's the slogan of the 1960s that the personal is political, a great feminist principle, elaborated by Michel Foucault. The idea that there is a politics of everyday life, that who gets what, when, and how in everyday life can be determined by you by changing the way language is used, by thinking differently about bodies and choice, the food we eat, the way we dress. These are political matters in this third sense. And it's this sphere, I think, in which we're witnessing the flourishing, not the exiting from, the flourishing of youth politics.
Na prošle europske izbore 2019. u godini prije pandemije izašao je rekordan broj mladih, kažu. No u Europskom parlamentu koji broji 705 zastupnika, onih mlađih od 30 godina ukupno je 6. Dobro ste čuli. 6. Toliko je u parlamentu i osoba čije je ime Martin.
You are one of, I think, youngest MPs, even though you're 30, am I right?
Yes, exactly.
Of the youngest MPs in European Parliament. How important it is to rejuvenate, let's say, European politics?
I think it's very important. As you said, I'm one of 10 members of parliament that is under 30. Well, now I'm 30, so I'm even cutting this threshold. But we have so many more people that are younger than me, right? My niece, for example, she turned 22 this year. She is having a very different life at the moment than I do. And I'm the one that is proposed to represent her and others in that age. And I think it's not completely possible if you miss out this perspective from even younger people. So we need more youth participation in political process. We need to make young people courageous enough to also run for office, even if you're 18, just turned 18, 20 or something like this, go for office, because your voice is important and your ideas are necessary to develop Europe for the future, because the future is the young people's present.
One of the conclusions of the Conference of the Future of Europe is basically to have some kind of consultative body of young people concerning the subjects of their interest, plus the recommendation is to lower the voting age to 16. For that you need let's say, serious civic or democratic education all around Europe to be equal and, how to say, have common ground. Do you see that this will happen after the elections in 2024?
Well, we already have proposed a Voting Rights Act that changes the voting age to 16. It has to pass through council, which is still in question, but I hope it will do that, and then we'll have already with the next elections the voting age of 16. When it comes to civil and politics education, I believe the best form of education is practice, is doing it yourself, is really, and that's why this body, consultative body for young people is important, so that young people get involved in politics, practice it already, and do it and understand why democracy is so important and what they have from it. But I also believe that it should be more than just a consultative body. We need to give power to the people. We need to give active power to young people. For that, I'm also, for example, using or want to use the funding that we have. We can make it possible to give a budget to young people in a specific area and say, what do you need? What do you need to improve your life, to get better job possibilities, to get better education, all of this? What is important for you? And you can decide together in a democratic way, and then learn how to improve your surroundings by getting involved, by getting active. And I think this is very important. That's something that we need to take serious and give power to youth, young people, but also to all citizens on the ground.
No ključno je pitanje kako uključiti mlade, odnosno kako se mladi mogu uključiti. Oni su najmanje zastupljena dobna skupina u europskim parlamentima, iako čine čak 1/5 europskog stanovništva. Europski forum mladih, najveća organizacija mladih na kontinentu, upozorava kako dobni nesrazmjer između političara i glasača može imati velike posljedice na ukupnu participaciju na izborima, posljedično dakle i na legitimitet izbornog procesa.
How do you engage youth?
Yeah, let me say first that many young people actually they don't know participation at all, because we don't learn about this. We don't learn about this at school, for example. That should be one of the first places in which we can engage in decision making around us. So this is crucial, that we have citizenship education, that we have participation education at the high schools, and also that we have the channels to participate and that institutions promote them. So I think this is really, I mean, it's a right of young people, and it's the responsibility of institutions to promote that participation. I've met many young people that say, oh wow, I love what you did when you were 14 years old. I wish I had that opportunity. And I was like, I'm really sorry that many people didn't get even the chance to get engaged in youth organizations or in youth clubs, because yeah, unfortunately we don't have all of us the information, and that's still, as I said, the responsibility of public institutions.
Corinne, we are standing here in front of European Parliament and Esplanade Solidarnost, but we are talking about youth in Europe today. We have elections in 2024. We have very difficult situation in Europe at the moment, with war in Ukraine, energy crisis, etc., 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 post-COVID problems.
True.
How much Europe talks about youth and their participation in elections and their interest in democracy as we know it or as we knew it? We can talk about that also.
Well, to be fair, I think the European Parliament, they start already working on it. They do place a focus on youth in the sense that they recognize it's one of the electorate that is like the hardest to mobilize. They do plan to launch, for instance, and we were speaking a bit earlier, to launch their strategy for the 2024 elections during the European Youth event in 2023. So I think youth are recognized, at least by the institutions, as, you know, an important electorate. In my opinion, they're not recognized by political parties and by politicians as as an electorate that they need to, address specifically, talk about their issues and so on. And I think that's a challenge because, as much as we can do as civil society engagement and mobilizing young people for participating in elections, if the politicians, if the ones that they have to vote for, they're not addressing them or they don't speak directly to them, then it's like, a dialogue of people who don't speak the same language. So I think the institutions have recognized it, but at the level of public administration, then there's only so much that you can do. But then the politicians, they really need to do a better job.
But if you are a politician of 50 or whatever, 40, but a member of traditional political party, which has its program, which has its constituencies, and 50% of people in her or his country go out and vote, of that he needs 20-25% to win the election, and he's fine. No one is asking, how legitimate maybe that government is. So you are spending your time with young people, you are doing policies, advocating your NGO. Are kids disaffected with politics, or what is the situation now?
My feeling is that we have to break the myths around politics. And also we have to break the myths around young people are not interested in politics, because they are. Yeah. It's just a matter of connecting their real life experiences, the quality of education, the fact that they can travel around Europe, the fact that they have access or not to mental health services or to jobs or to whatever affects their lives. We have to do a better job at connecting those experiences with politics and with the power of their vote and of their ballots. Also, statistically, young people Europe is, a continent that is aged. So by definition, young people, they are not numerous electorate, so to speak. However, I think we also don't do a good job, and I think the media here plays a crucial role. For example, if I look at the US in particular, they report on the difference that young people make in elections, or at least the potential that they have to make in elections. And the message that you put forward as media is that if you show up and vote, this is the difference that you can make. And we don't have that kind of message in Europe, for example.
But we have some statistics. You've mentioned US in the recent elections saw that Generation Z basically changed the tide that was projected. But in Europe, we see young people voting for far-right more and more.
And that's a question of education, and it's a question of how much disenfranchised they are from the political class, or how much they see themselves represented by the mainstream political class. And also the social media plays a crucial role, because young people, on average, a young person spends around 7-8 hours a day on social media platforms. And given the algorithms and the way they are designed, we create echo chambers and polarization, and of course you're exposed to one view of the world, and not, and usually that's not the centrist one.
A što je uopće danas taj centar i tko ga drži? Oni koji se u njega kunu, a nitko im više ne vjeruje. Oni za koje ljudi kažu da su svi isti, korumpirani i prijetvorni. Oni koji tutnje po društvenim mrežama, a podrivaju vladavinu prava ili oblikuju nove realnosti protiv kojih se nemoguće boriti. Riječ demokracija izmišljena je još u antičkoj Grčkoj. Zanimljivo je da joj do danas još nismo našli zamjenu, niti demokratski sustav zamijenili nečim boljim. Strah od proklizavanja europske demokracije najčešće se u proteklom desetljeću ogleda upravo u Grčkoj, pa smo se uputili ondje, prema korijenima. U Upravo su mladi u Grčkoj bili ona snaga koja je s vlasti zbacila vojnu huntu i vratila zemlju na demokratski put. Na Atenskom politehničkom fakultetu 1973. studenti su se pobunili protiv generala te poveli Grke prema općem ustanku protiv represije. Sedamnaestog studenog tenk je razvalio vrata fakulteta. Taj trenutak označio je početak kraja vojne hunte, a danas se slavi kao državni praznik. Metalna pregažena vrata u spomenik žrtvama diktature i dalje stoje na ulazu u fakultet kao vječni simbol otpora mladosti. Kruh, obrazovanje, sloboda. Bio je to onda slogan grčkih studenata koji su do danas ostali tkivom aktivnog građanstva. Profesorica Lamprini Rori, koja se bavi pitanjima demokracije i političkog nasilja, vodi me kroz hodnike fakulteta koji pod krovom ima ekonomiju, pravo i politologiju.
It has a certain let's say symbolic value in the sense that during the 7-year dictatorship there was an occupation in 1973 in this building, so it draws back from this legacy of youth protest against the junta. And you can see this flare, I'm sure that you observed it while we were walking to come here. There are slogans almost everywhere. Well, this is not only a trademark of this university, this building, but it tells us something for the way that youth is politicized in Greece since the transition to democracy, at least in the university environment.
How is it different from other European countries? Because we know what you said from history. The revolt started in the student movement. It's always students on the street, not just concerning the subjects that are, subject for the youth. What is the history, not just history and present day sense of this politicization of the youth from your perspective?
So I think Greece is not really an exception to other youths in Europe, particularly not when we compare it to youths in Southern Europe, where they had similar recent historic pasts. But it is maybe different in the sense that let's say political parties have put their feet into the universities. So since the 1974 transition to democracy, and especially in the 80s, the political youths have had great powers over choosing, for instance, the academic authorities, the rectors, and they have had significant power in decisions that are made by the collective organs in the university. This is something that has changed recently in terms of official powers, so they are diminishing, but on the other hand, the youth in the university remains quite politicized.
Zidovi oslikani političkim parolama, studentske grupe povezane s različitim društvenim pokretima, hodnici, mjesto agitacije i promoviranja političkih ideja. Na neke dijelove fakulteta koje drže radikalne skupine čak nije moguće niti ući. Nakon nedavnog upada policije na fakultete upravo zbog nasilja, u grčkom se društvu povela velika polemika.
The Greek youth is quite politicized, and we have seen during the financial crisis that young people have voted for the radical parties of the left and the right. So we have seen young people voting for Golden Dawn, for instance, and this was quite shocking. But also we have seen young people voting for Syriza and for other leftist parties. This, of course, is not an exception. I don't think that Greece is an outlier in that. We generally see radical patterns of behavior among young people. We see, though, that after the, let's say, the end of the financial crisis, a lot of those tensions have diminished. So we see, for instance, that violent protest has dropped a lot, which during the crisis it was like everywhere. Mm-hmm. So we had violent movements, protest movements. This meant that the youth was in the streets in a quite a regular basis. This is not the case anymore. We still see that young people vote, for instance, majoritarily for Syriza. Syriza is the party that has won in the last elections the youth vote, and the conservatives are quite aware that they are not very popular among young people. But I don't think this is a static situation, and from the surveys that we have seen during the last couple of years, what is apparent is that the more the situation in the economy, gets back to normal, and unemployment is diminishing, especially among the youth, because Greece has had the highest youth unemployment during the crisis. So the more we get back to normal and the trends in the economy are getting better, the more we see this radicalization, being toned down at least. The wages are very low in Greece, and this is something that hasn't changed after the crisis. It's a very serious problem, and we lack good quality jobs for young people, so people feel that even if they have a job, it will be something very precarious, just to make ends meet. So they don't see that they have good employment perspectives in this country, and this is real, it's not something subjective. The labor market has deteriorated a lot during the financial crisis, and this hasn't gone back to normal yet.
U svojih 20 mladih godina Niki Turka preživjela je kroz grčku perspektivu sve europske krize.
Nikki, what is democracy for you?
Well, a very nice question. Democracy, I think it's protecting the powerless over the powerful, first of all. I have a voice, and therefore I have to speak, and I should speak.
We are standing here in Syntagma Square in Athens. Athens, we learn at school, is the cradle of European democracy and democracy as such. And Syntagma Square is very symbolic, because here Greeks come out, they protest, youth come out and protest, students come out and protest. You are 20, so we are in 2022, minus 13 years, you were 7. So yes. Basically you were starting elementary school.
When the economic crisis.
Where Eurozone crisis.
Yes.
You remember any of that?
Yes, I remember, and many times, because I have older siblings, we keep saying that I see things very differently.
In what way?
Yes, in economic way, for instance. I balance things differently, because I've grew in a situation in a decade where we should actually buy and count very carefully whatever we wanted. So after that economic crisis, we went into pandemic crisis. After pandemic crisis, when we went into an energy crisis, now we're witnessing
and you had the refugee crisis also,
the refugee crisis 2015, yes, which was another crisis in the crisis. So, you know, it's a bit difficult.
In the university, what are the subjects that you discuss? Because, okay, you are studying international relations, so probably the world interests you and the position of Greece in that world interests you. But, you know, what are the subjects? Are you thinking, you know, oh God, how will we get a job? Oh God, how will I live and buy an apartment? What are the struggles?
Well, one of the main struggles is if we will be absorbed from the community that we're living. And I think that the solution to this problem is not making more difficult the Pan-Hellenic exams. The solution here is to make more structures that will be able, after we finish our degree, to absorb us in a way that we will seem useful for our country.
This is the parliament building. So we know that Greece is one of the few countries in Europe that lowered the voting age. You can go, some countries is 16, you can go out and vote at 17. Did it help a lot? Because we know that, you know, Greeks are very vocal about their political affiliation, they protest. So did it help the youth participation?
I think that it definitely helped, but let me be clear, I do believe and I have faith in our constitution, but this is not what just we have to do. Not only we have to lower the
voting age.
Voting age. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, what else? Do you think
not only we have to lower the voting age, but we also have to be sure that young people are very informed about our constitution and what politics, for example, means. You can't just lower that age and expect a 16-year-old boy or girl to go in the election center and decide for its future.
Vojni rok služio je upravo kao član počasne straže pred grčkim parlamentom, rezervirano za najbolje. Nakon studija na prestižnim svjetskim sveučilištima, Stefano Gandolfo angažiran je kako bi kreirao i pomogao u provedbi ključne i strateške reforme za grčko društvo, one obrazovne.
You're young, you're 31 years old. This series about youth in Europe today, the challenges and our common future. The history of Greece is the one that we all know, the cradle of democracy, our roots of Europe. The modern history of Greece is the one of, you know, military junta and then rebellion of students, leftist students, and then this new era and new Republic of Greece. You had very turbulent decade. You have Eurozone crisis, refugee crisis, everything focus was on Greece. Do you breathe better now?
I would say much better. Yeah, it doesn't compare to 10 years ago, to 2012, to 2015. The situation has changed a lot. We tend to forget that even though this was the largest loss of like GDP during peacetime in world history, that Greek democracy stood so strong, you know, and even though a far right, extremist neo-Nazi party was elected in parliament, in the next election cycle, it was voted out, and then the justice system deemed it as an illegal criminal organization. So I think it's very important to remember that despite all the crises, that there has been a tremendous amount of resilience and fortitude, both at the individual level, the family level, which has been extremely important in supporting everyone, and at the level of institutions, and then more broadly in democratic speaking.
We are talking, it's November in Athens. We are going to see what kind of winter awaits us, but we are faced with unprecedented situation overall in the continent, new crisis with war in Ukraine, energy crisis. Do you, as you told me, but do you think that we will prevail as democracies in Europe, because we are faced with huge, let's say, autocratic, authoritarian wave, and we heard Putin saying that basically he's challenging the values of democracy?
I think we will, because there is no other way for us. Maybe we might have to reform, and to be honest, I see, given my experience with China, China being a much more, I don't like to use the word threat, but an alternative, because there are some things about the Chinese political system that, for example, the political system's relationship to time. So like 5 years is short-term policy in China. For us, 5 years is more than an election cycle. So maybe we might in the future have to reconsider a little bit how democratic societies can plan long-term in order to be able to, you know, stand and compete on an equal basis with other political systems like the Chinese one.
You've mentioned two things, China and reforms. We'll start with China. Your field of study was Chinese philosophy.
Right, yeah.
Which, in your explanation of the different planet of thinking which China is, in a sense, can be added value for you in terms of your current job, which is basically helping the Minister of Education make a huge reform of education here in Greece.
Right.
So what are the challenges and what is it that you are doing?
So, I mean, one of the major challenges that we focused and the current government has done a lot has been opening up the higher education system. And so we've basically done three things in order to make universities far more international and make it far easier for them to strike all kinds of partnerships with universities from around the world. So basically we've done three things. The first one is to make legislative changes, so reduce red tape and give much more freedom to universities to strike partnerships such as dual degrees, double degrees, start English language programs, start the joint research centers, and we're already seeing that so many universities are responding to that. The second is that we've provided financial tools, so we've given funding for them to create such partnerships and international relations. And also we are investing a lot. We have a 60 million fund for visiting scholars and visiting professors and visiting researchers in order to reverse brain drain and start talking about brain gain. And the third is that we're striking strategic partnerships with specific countries or regions.
But basically what we know is that young Greek are the ones who live longest with their parents until 30-35 as Croats do, and they have a big issue of the first employment. Immigration is a huge problem, demography in Greece. So do you plan to leave Greece, or how many of your friends want to stay and live here or want to go away from this country?
Oh, no way. We do have demographic problem actually, but I think that it's just about this decade, 20 till 30 maybe, and after that to come back to our country. Otherwise, who will stay here? I mean, our parents and animals. We should come back and live here and find something to do actually. We have to build our future, yes, here.
How important for youth today is politics at all?
I think that youth disengagement, political disengagement is a very serious problem nowadays. But on the other hand, I think that after so many crises, we said earlier, economic crisis, pandemic crisis, energy crisis, refugee crisis, youth, I think that is active from now on, and they have to be active, otherwise what are we doing here?
How important for young Greek is Europe and European politics? Because we talked, you suffered a lot, but you know, what is Europe and European identity for them? How, because you know probably that because you talk to a lot of students.
Frankly, I think that we don't have that much faith in Europe anymore. And we witnessed Europe's, closed door after the pandemic crisis. Now we have energy crisis, and we don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. So I think that we don't have that much faith anymore.
Interesting thing is also, we've mentioned that young Greeks can vote with 17.
Yes.
But you cannot be elected until you're 25.
Yes.
How come? So, you know,
I really don't know.
You cannot still be elected. You have to wait until 25.
Yes, I have to wait till 25, and after that decide if I want to do something or not. It's a problem, that also. It doesn't make sense, actually, you know.
Talking about importance of education in today's Europe, which is changing demographically, digitally.
Yeah.
How do you see it? Because, you know, education cannot be the same as in my time. But, for example, in Croatia, we do still have this, some say old-fashioned education, but how to adapt and transform, because it's a expensive reform. You need to train the teachers and professors, and things are moving like this. So how to adapt at all in these turbulent times?
So the current government has taken a very holistic approach in revamping and changing almost everything from pre-K to high school and education. The first big major difference has been that we have completely revamped all 166 school curricula. And the big change has been going from a knowledge-centric model to a skills-based paradigm. So instead of focusing on imparting knowledge, which is still obviously very important, what's more important is that students learn that they acquire skills such as critical thinking, collaboration, communication, compassion, and of course a lot of digital skills. So this is something that we've done by changing all school curricula effectively, and also by introducing a new module called the Skills Labs, which focuses explicitly on the cultivation of soft, digital, but also life skills. So also talking about mental health and democratic citizenship, and how does a student protect him or herself, you know, from bad use of the internet and misinformation, or, you know, a filter on TikTok. Like, how do you deal with your self-image as a 14 and 15-year-old, unless someone teaches you that? And, you know, oftentimes parents might not be the best suited to do that. So we've created this program, which is very innovative in a lot of different ways. And this is probably the most popular reform that the current government has introduced in terms of education, and we see it accepted by everyone. And just to a last point, to touch on the teacher training, we had a voluntary teacher training program, and we targeted 75,000 teachers, and almost 75,000 of them, almost 100%, participated in the teacher training. And there's something generally that we've done, that everything new that we introduce into the system, it always comes with associated teacher training, and we see that the teachers actually really love it and embrace it.
So you brought me to Plaka, the old part of Athens.
Yes.
To a place called Melina, over Melina Mercouri.
That's right.
We know what Melina Mercouri meant for Greece, and we know how engaged she was in politics. Women, young women in politics, young women engaged in public life, how important it is, and is, you know, Greece still conservative in that regard? How many women are there out there spoken? You have a lot of women ministers, but
yes, but you know, there are not that many in the Greek parliament. We need, we as women, I mean, we need to start engaging more with politics, in politics, and express our own, actually, our rights.
Your mother is more or less my age. Do you understand each other?
Yeah, I didn't know we were going to say that. Mother, don't watch right now, please.
But do you understand each other in a sense when you talk about world and when you talk about today? How do you see this intergenerational cooperation and communication?
I think it's nice. It's a bit difficult, and with my father also, because they're at the same age. But it's nice, you know, they see things very differently, and I just try to understand them. I guess they try to do the same with me. But yes, there are many differences. We just talk a lot, and we try to understand each other, find something between to say, and yes.
What would be the message to European youth from Athens, like the cradle of democracy?
I know that we are witnessing a very difficult period right now. But I think that youth is here, and youth will be here in the next European elections. my message to all youth around Europe or around the world, I don't know, is to be active, be brave and do something to change the world.
U svijetu nesigurnosti, krize i straha, lijepo je ako ništa čuti da je idealizam i dalje u mladosti. A svijet i sve ono što se u njemu tektonski mijenja, mijenja i nju. Na kratkom putu kojim smo krenuli ovim serijalom pokušat ćemo, ako ništa, sljedećim nastavcima barem uhvatiti duh vremena, ako ne i iskru koja se ugasi često prije no što proplamsa. Iduće subote pričamo o Hrvatskoj.